The mountain man had been gone for 10 years, and when he finally crested the ridge overlooking what used to be his family's homestead in Parawan, Utah, he found a woman working his land like she owned it. Hank Morrison pulled his horse to a stop, his weathered hands gripping the reins as he stared down at the valley below. The sun beat down mercilessly on his broad shoulders, and his long dark hair, streaked with hints of silver despite him only being 32 years old, hung past his collar. His jaw was set hard beneath a thick beard, and his muscular frame tensed as he watched the figure in the distance moving through rows of what looked like thriving wheat. The year was 1878, and he had left this place in 1868 as a grief-stricken young man of 22, his entire family buried in the small plot behind where the barn used to stand. That barn was still there, he noted with surprise. In fact, it looked better than when he had left it. The roof had been repaired, the fence line extended, and there were chickens scratching in a yard that looked well tended. Smoke curled from the chimney of the small cabin, his family's cabin, the one his father had built with his own hands back in 1855. Hank's throat tightened. He had expected to find ruins, maybe squatters at worst, or more likely just an abandoned plot that the Utah Territory had reclaimed. He certainly had not expected to find someone farming it like they belonged there. He urged his horse forward, descending the rocky trail with practiced ease despite the decade he had spent in the Montana mountains, trapping and hunting and trying to forget what he had lost here. His powerful thighs gripped the saddle as his mount picked its way down the slope. Everything about Hank spoke of a man shaped by harsh wilderness, from his sun-darkened skin to the rifle strapped to his saddle and the knife at his belt. His arms, visible where his shirt sleeves were rolled up, were corded with muscle earned from years of hard living. As he drew closer, he could see the figure more clearly. It was definitely a woman, wearing a faded blue dress with her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She was bent over, pulling weeds from between the wheat stalks with methodical efficiency. She had not heard him approach yet over the whisper of wind through the grain. Hank cleared his throat loudly when he was about 20 feet away. The woman straightened immediately, spinning around with a hand flying to her chest. She was younger than he had initially thought, maybe mid-20s, with a face that was pretty in a wholesome, sun-kissed way. Her eyes were wide with surprise, a striking green that caught the afternoon light. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice steady despite the obvious startle. Her free hand moved subtly to her side, where Hank noticed the handle of a small pistol tucked into her belt. "Smart woman living alone out here." "I should be asking you that," Hank said, his voice rougher than he intended. "A decade of minimal conversation did that to a man, seeing as you are on my land." The woman's expression shifted from wary to confused. "Your land, sir? I do not know what you are talking about. This is my property. Has been for near about 9 years now." Hank dismounted, his boots hitting the packed earth with solid thuds. He was a tall man, 6'3", and built like the mountains he had called home. He saw the woman's eyes widen slightly as she took in his full size, but she held her ground. He respected that. "Name is Hank Morrison," he said, pulling off his worn leather gloves and tucking them into his belt. "My father was Thomas Morrison. He built that cabin in 1855, right after we came west from Missouri. My mother, father, and little sister all died of fever in the winter of 1867. I buried them myself right behind that barn. Come spring of 1868, I could not stay here anymore, so I left. But I never sold this land, and I never gave anyone permission to farm it." The woman's face had gone pale during his explanation. Her hand fell away from her pistol, and she took a few steps closer, studying his face intently. "You are Thomas Morrison's son, the one who left?" "Only son," Hank confirmed. "Who are you? And how did you come to be here?" She swallowed hard, and he noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "My name is Clara Vaughn. I arrived in Parawan in the spring of 1869. The town council told me this land had been abandoned, that the owner had left and was presumed dead or not coming back. They said I could claim it if I could work it and make it productive again. I have been here ever since, alone, breaking my back to make this place thrive." Hank felt a muscle tick in his jaw. "They had no right to tell you that." "I did not know," Clara said quickly, and he could hear genuine distress in her voice. "I swear to you, if I had known someone might come back, that this was not truly abandoned, I would never have taken it. But I needed land, and they said it was legal, and I had nowhere else to go." There was a story there, Hank could tell. A young woman, alone in the frontier, desperate enough to take on an abandoned homestead. That took courage and no small amount of desperation. He ran a hand through his long hair, suddenly feeling the weight of his 10-year absence. What happened to your family? Clara's chin lifted slightly, a defensive gesture. I have no family. My father died of consumption in 1868 in Denver. We had come west seeking better air for him, but it did not help. My mother had already passed when I was young. I had a fiancée, but when my father died and left debts, he decided he wanted a woman with better prospects. I came to Utah Territory looking for a fresh start, and the people of Parowan offered me this chance. Hank studied her for a long moment. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Clara Vaughn stood in the middle of his family's wheat field, dirt under her fingernails and hope dying in her green eyes, and he found himself at a crossroads he had not anticipated. Show me what you have done with the place, he said finally. Relief flooded Clara's face, though it was mixed with uncertainty. Of course. Would you like to water your horse? There is a good well. I had it deepened 2 years ago. That would be appreciated. As they walked toward the barn, Clara began pointing out the improvements she had made. The roof was half gone when I arrived. I traded labor in town to get help with the repairs. The chicken coop is new. I built that myself. The fence line extends another 20 yards east now, giving more grazing room. I have 3 milk cows, a dozen chickens, and I have been saving to buy a breeding pair of pigs. Hank listened as she spoke, noting the pride in her voice despite her obvious worry about her situation. The homestead did look better than he remembered. His parents had been good people, but not particularly skilled farmers. His father had been a carpenter by trade, only turning to farming out of necessity. It seemed Clara Vaughn had a natural talent for it. The inside of the barn was clean and well organized. His horse drank gratefully from the trough while Clara fetched fresh hay. Hank noticed carpentry tools hung neatly on the wall. Some he recognized as his father's, others clearly newer additions. You do your own repairs? He asked, nodding toward the tools. I have to, Clara said simply. Cannot afford to hire help for everything, and I learned quickly that if I wanted something done right, I needed to do it myself. Old Mr. Peterson, in town, taught me basic carpentry in exchange for fresh eggs and butter. They moved from the barn to the cabin. Hank hesitated at the threshold, and Clara seemed to sense his reluctance. Take your time, she said softly. I imagine this must be difficult. He stepped inside, and the past rushed over him like a flood. The main room was much as he remembered. The stone fireplace his father had built stone by stone, the windows that looked out toward the mountains. But there were differences too. Clara's touches were everywhere. Simple curtains on the windows, wildflowers in a jar on the table, a neat stack of books on a shelf he had built as a boy. The place felt lived in and cared for in a way it had not even when his family was alive. I sleep up there, Clara said, pointing to the loft. I did not touch anything in the small bedroom. I know there are things in there that must have belonged to your family. I felt it was not my place to disturb them. Hank moved to the bedroom door and opened it. Everything was as he had left it, covered in dust. His parents' wedding quilt on the bed, his mother's sewing basket, his little sister's rag doll on the small trunk in the corner. His chest tightened painfully. I should have come back sooner, he said, more to himself than to Clara. Where have you been? She asked quietly. Up in the mountains, trapping mostly, living alone, trying to outrun memories. He turned back to face her. Did not to face her. Not work, turns out. Clara moved to the stove and began building up the fire. Have you eaten? I was about to make supper. It is the least I can offer you. Hank should have said no, should have told her they needed to figure out the land situation right away, get everything sorted. But the truth was, he was tired and hungry, and the smell of home-cooked food was already starting to fill the cabin as Clara pulled out cornbread and began slicing salt pork. That would be kind of you, he said. They fell into an awkward silence as Clara cooked. Hank found himself watching her move around the kitchen with comfortable efficiency. She knew where everything was, had her own rhythm in this space. She had made this place her home, and he could see in every gesture how much it meant to her. You have done good work here, he said finally, breaking the silence. More than good. My parents would have been impressed. Clara paused, her back to him, and he saw her shoulders relax slightly. That means more than you know. I have poured everything I have into this place. My whole life is here. Tell me about it, Hank said, surprising himself. Tell me about the last 9 years, what you have done, what you have built. So Clara did. As she cooked and then as they ate at the same table where his family had once shared meals, she told him everything. How she had arrived in Parowan with almost nothing, just a few coins and the clothes on her back. How the first winter had nearly broken her, alone in the cabin with her supplies running dangerously low, how she had learned to shoot to keep wolves and coyotes away from her livestock, how she had slowly, painfully, learned to coax life from the stubborn Utah soil. The wheat was my breakthrough, she said, her eyes lighting up as she spoke. The first 2 years I could barely grow enough vegetables to feed myself. But then I talked to some of the Mormon farmers in town, learned about their irrigation techniques. I dug channels to bring water from the creek, worked until my hands bled, but it paid off. Last harvest was my best yet. I am even selling some surplus in town now. Hank found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested. You did the irrigation work yourself? Most of it. Mr. Jensen and his 2 sons helped with the heaviest digging, but I traded them fresh beef for that. I had to slaughter one of my first cows, but it was worth it. That is impressive, Hank said, and he meant it. The work she was describing would have been backbreaking for a man, let alone a woman working alone. You are a hell of a farmer, Clara Vaughn. A blush crept up her cheeks at the compliment. I had good motivation. This place became my whole world. I had nowhere else to go, no one waiting for me anywhere. It was make this work or perish. Still, Hank said, pushing his empty plate away. The meal had been simple but good, the best food he had eaten in years. You could have remarried. Pretty woman like you, someone would have offered. Clara's expression closed off slightly. Several men have offered. I have refused them all. Why? She met his eyes directly. Because every single one of them was more interested in getting a productive farm than in getting a wife. They wanted what I had built, not me. I would rather work myself to the bone alone than hand over everything I have created to a man who sees me as nothing more than a convenient acquisition. There was steel in her voice, and Hank respected it. She had been hurt before by her fiancé's betrayal, and she had learned from it. So what happens now? Asked Clara, voicing the question that had been hanging between them all evening. This is your land legally. I understand that. Are you going to ask me to leave? Hank sat back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. It was a fair question, and one he had been wrestling with since he had first ridden down from the ridge. By rights, he could demand she leave immediately. The land was his, had always been his. But looking around at everything she had accomplished, at the life she had painstakingly built here, the thought of turning her out made his stomach turn. I do not know yet, he said honestly. I came back here thinking I would find ruins, maybe start over. I did not expect to find you, did not expect to find any of this. He gestured around the cabin. You have earned your place here in ways that have nothing to do with legal claims. That matters to me. Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Thank you for saying that. Let me think on it tonight, Hank said. We will talk more in the morning, figure something out that is fair to both of us. Where will you sleep? Clara asked. The barn has clean hay, but it gets cold at night. You are welcome to the bedroom. I can stay in the loft. Barn is fine, Hank said, standing. His large frame seemed to fill the small cabin. I have slept in worse places, believe me. Montana winters make Utah seem downright hospitable. Clara stood as well, wringing her hands nervously. Hank, I just want you to know that whatever you decide, I am grateful you are willing to consider my situation. Many men would have just ordered me off immediately. You have worked too hard to be thrown away like that, Hank said. My father always taught me that a man respects honest work, no matter who does it. You have put honest work into this land. That means something. He collected his saddlebags and rifle, then headed for the door. Clara followed him out into the cool evening air. The stars were beginning to emerge overhead, brilliant in the clear desert sky. Good night, Hank Morrison, Clara said softly. Good night, Clara Vaughn. Hank made his way to the barn, his mind churning with thoughts. He settled into the hay, his body grateful for even this simple rest after weeks of traveling. Through a gap in the barn wall, he could see the cabin, lamplight glowing golden in the windows. Somewhere inside, Clara was preparing for bed, probably just as uncertain about the future as he was. This was not how he had imagined his return would go. Nothing about this day had been what he expected. But as he drifted off to sleep, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and livestock, Hank realized that he felt more at peace than he had in 10 years. Maybe coming home had been the right choice after all, even if home was now more complicated than he had ever imagined it could be. Morning came with the sound of a rooster crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. Hank woke with the sun, a habit ingrained from years of mountain living. He found the well and washed his face in the cold water, scrubbing away the trail dust and sleep. When he looked toward the cabin, he saw smoke already rising from the chimney. Clara was up and working, He found her in the chicken coop, collecting eggs in a woven basket. She looked up at his approach, and he saw shadows under her eyes. She had not slept well. "Morning," she said. "I am making breakfast if you are hungry. Fresh eggs and biscuits. Sounds good," Hank said. He noticed she moved with tired determination, like a woman who had learned to push through exhaustion as a matter of survival. They ate in the cabin, and Hank noticed Clara only picked at her food, her eyes darting to him nervously every few moments. "You are going to make yourself sick if you do not eat," he said finally. "I cannot stop thinking about what you are going to decide," Clara admitted, setting down her fork. "This place is everything to me, Hank. I know I have no legal right to it, but my heart is in every inch of this land. The thought of leaving, of starting over again somewhere else with nothing, it terrifies me." Hank set down his own fork, his strong hands folding together on the table. "I have been thinking all night about this situation, about what is right and what is fair. Those are not always the same thing." Clara waited, her green eyes locked on his face. "The way I see it," Hank continued, "we have a few options. First, I could ask you to leave and take back the land entirely. That is my legal right, but it sits wrong with me. Second, I could sell you the land, but I am guessing you do not have the kind of money that would require." Clara shook her head miserably. "I have been saving, but it would take me years to accumulate enough for a fair price on a working farm like this." "Third option," Hank said. "We work this land together." Clara's head snapped up. "Together? Partnership," Hank said. "You have proven you can run this place, and you have built something worth keeping. But one person alone can only do so much. With two of us working together, we could expand. Maybe buy those pigs you mentioned, plant more acres, make this place truly prosperous." Hope flared in Clara's eyes, but it was tempered with caution. "What would you want in return? Equal share of the profits?" "We would have to work out the details," Hank said. "But yes, something like that. You have put in 9 years of work. That has value. I own the land. That has value. Together, we could build something neither of us could manage alone." Clara was quiet for a long moment, her mind clearly working through the implications. People in town would talk. A man and woman, unmarried, working the same homestead together. It would damage my reputation. "I had not thought of that," Hank admitted. Small-town morality was something he had not had to consider in the mountains. Would it be bad enough to cause real problems? "Possibly," Clara said carefully. "Parowan is a Mormon town mostly. They are decent people, but they have standards about such things. If we were family, it would be different. Cousins or siblings working together would be acceptable. But an unrelated man and woman—" She trailed off, but Hank understood the problem. Frontier society could be harsh in its judgments, especially toward women who stepped outside accepted norms. "What if we married?" The words were out of Hank's mouth before he had fully thought them through. Clara's eyes went wide with shock. "What?" Hank felt heat creep up his neck, but he pressed forward. The idea, now that it was spoken, had a certain logic to it. A marriage of convenience. It would solve the reputation problem and make the partnership legally clear. We would both have equal claim to the land and the work. No one could say anything improper was happening. "You are suggesting we marry just to save my reputation and make a business arrangement legal?" Clara's voice was faint. "People have married for worse reasons," Hank said, then realized how that sounded. "What I mean is, we are both alone. We both need this land. Neither of us is looking for a romantic entanglement based on what we have each said. But we could help each other build something good here. It does not have to be a real marriage in every sense, just a legal arrangement between partners." Clara stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to him. Hank waited, giving her time to process. He knew it was a wild suggestion, probably crazy. They had known each other less than a day, but something about it felt right to him in a way he could not quite explain. "You would be willing to tie yourself legally to a woman you just met?" Clara asked without turning around. "You would be willing to tie yourself to a man you just met?" Hank countered. "It goes both ways, Clara. But from what I have seen in one day, you are hardworking, honest, and capable. Those are qualities I value. And I hope I have shown you that I am willing to be fair and respect what you have built." Clara turned back to face him. "What about children? Marital rights? The things that usually come with marriage?" "We would have to set boundaries," Hank said. "Make it clear what kind of arrangement this is. I am not looking to take advantage of you, Clara. I am looking for a solution that lets us both keep what matters to us." "I need time to think about this," Clara said. "It is a huge decision." "Fair enough," Hank said. "Take all the time you need. Meanwhile, if you do not mind, I would like to look around the property more, see what else you have done." Clara nodded, relief evident on her face at the temporary reprieve from the heavy conversation. "Of course. I need to check on the irrigation channels anyway. Make sure none of them have gotten blocked." They spent the morning working separately, each lost in their own thoughts. Hank walked the fence line, noting where Clara had made repairs and extensions. He checked the small herd of cattle, finding them healthy and well-tended. He examined the fields, seeing the evidence of careful crop rotation and soil management. Everything he saw reinforced his impression from the night before. Clara Vaughn was an exceptional farmer, better than he would have been if he had stayed. Around noon, he found her kneeling by one of the irrigation channels, using a small shovel to clear away debris. Her dress was wet at the hem, and her hands were muddy, but she worked with focused efficiency. "Need help?" he asked. She looked up, startled, then nodded. "There is another shovel by the barn if you want to work on the channel further down. A beaver has been causing problems upstream, blocking things up." Hank retrieved the shovel and joined her in the work. It felt good to use his muscles for productive labor rather than just survival. They worked in companionable silence for an hour, the sun beating down on them. "I have been thinking about your proposal," Clara said suddenly. Not looking up from her digging, Hank stopped working, waiting. "It is mad," she continued. "Completely mad. We do not know each other. We might despise each other after a few weeks together." "That is possible," Hank agreed. "But I have also been thinking about the alternative," Clara said, finally looking at him. "If I leave here, I have nothing. Nowhere to go, no prospects. I would probably end up marrying someone just for security, which is exactly what I have been trying to avoid. At least with you, I would be a partner, not property. You have already shown you respect what I have built." "I do respect it," Hank confirmed. Clara took a deep breath. "If we did this, if we married, I would want certain assurances, boundaries, like you said. My own space, at least initially. The right to have a say in all decisions about the farm, and the understanding that if it does not work, if we truly cannot get along, we would figure out a fair way to separate." "All of that sounds reasonable," Hank said. His heart was beating faster, though he tried to keep his voice steady. "I would want the same assurances, honestly. Space to adjust, equal say in decisions, and the understanding that we are trying to build a partnership based on mutual respect." "It still feels insane," Clara said, but there was a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Maybe the best decisions do," Hank said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "I have spent 10 years making careful, safe choices, hiding in the mountains. Did not make me happy. Maybe it is time to try something different." Clara laughed, a bright sound that seemed to startle her as much as it did him. "When you put it that way, how can I refuse? All right, Hank Morrison, I will marry you. God help us both." They stood there in the middle of the irrigation ditch, covered in mud and sweat, and shook hands like they were sealing a business deal, which, in a way, they were. But as Hank felt Clara's work roughened hand in his, he found himself hoping it might become more than that someday. Not that he would admit such a thing out loud, especially not now. "We should go to town," Clara said, releasing his hand. "Speak to Pastor Brown. He can perform the ceremony. The sooner we make this official, the sooner we can stop worrying about gossip." "Fine by me," Hank said. "Let me clean up and saddle the horses." An hour later they were riding together toward Parowan, Clara on a sturdy mare she had raised from a filly. The town was small, just a few dozen buildings clustered along the main road, but it was more civilization than Hank had seen in years. People stopped to stare as they passed, clearly curious about the stranger riding alongside Clara Vaughn. "They are going to have questions," Clara murmured. "Let them ask," Hank said. "We have nothing to hide." Pastor Brown was a kindly older man with white hair and warm eyes. He received them in his small office next to the church, listening with patient interest as they explained the situation. "So you are Thomas Morrison's son," he said when they finished. "I heard he had a boy who left after the fever. Tragic business, that was. Your father was a good man." "He was," Hank agreed, his throat tight. "And now you want to marry Miss Vaughn here," the pastor continued, his gaze moving between them. "After knowing each other for how long?" "1 day," Clara admitted. "I know how it sounds, Pastor, but the situation is complicated, and we believe this is the right solution." Pastor Brown was quiet for a moment, studying them both carefully. "I have known Clara for 9 years now. She is one of the finest women in this town, hard-working and honest. If she believes this is right, then I am inclined to trust her judgment. And Mr. Morrison, you have your father's eyes." He was a man of integrity, and I am willing to give you the benefit of the doubt based on his memory. Thank you, Hank said, surprised by the emotion he felt at hearing his father remembered so kindly. However, the pastor continued, I would encourage you both to think carefully about what you are doing. Marriage is a sacred commitment, not just a legal convenience. Even if you are entering into it for practical reasons now, you will be bound together before God. That is not something to take lightly. We understand, Clara said quietly. Do you? Pastor Brown leaned forward. Because what I am hearing is two lonely people trying to solve practical problems. But marriage has a way of becoming more complicated than practical. Feelings develop. Expectations change. Are you prepared for that possibility? Hank glanced at Clara, who was looking down at her hands. We have discussed boundaries and expectations, he said. We are going into this with open eyes. All right, Pastor Brown said finally. If you are both certain, I will perform the ceremony. When did you want to do this? As soon as possible, Clara said. Today, if you can manage it. The pastor raised his eyebrows but nodded. Very well, I will need 2 witnesses. Let me send for Mr. and Mrs. Jensen. They are good people, discreet, and I trust them not to spread gossip. While they waited for the witnesses to arrive, Hank and Clara stood outside the church, both lost in their own thoughts. The reality of what they were about to do was sinking in. Are you scared? Clara asked softly. Terrified, Hank admitted. You? Absolutely. She turned to look at him, and he saw vulnerability in her green eyes. But I am also hopeful. That probably makes me a fool. If you are a fool, then so am I, Hank said. Because I am hopeful too. The Jensens arrived, a weathered farmer and his plump, kind-faced wife. They seemed surprised by the hasty wedding, but agreed to serve as witnesses without prying too much. Mrs. Jensen did insist on pinning some wildflowers to Clara's dress, declaring that every bride deserved some touch of beauty on her wedding day. The ceremony itself was brief and simple. They stood before Pastor Brown in the small church, the afternoon sun streaming through the plain windows. Hank was acutely aware of how large and rough he must look next to Clara's smaller frame. His hands, when he took hers to speak the vows, dwarfed her own. Do you, Hank Morrison, take Clara Vaughn to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death do you part? I do, Hank said, his deep voice steady. And do you, Clara Vaughn, take Hank Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death do you part? I do, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Utah, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Morrison, you may kiss your bride. Hank hesitated, unsure if Clara would want that given the nature of their arrangement. But she lifted her face to him and he saw acceptance in her eyes. He leaned down, his large frame bending to reach her, and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips. It was chaste and brief, but Hank felt something shift in his chest nonetheless. They signed the marriage certificate with Mr. and Mrs. Jensen as witnesses. Clara's hand shook slightly as she wrote her new name, Clara Morrison. Hank found he liked the sound of it. Congratulations to you both, Mrs. Jensen said warmly, embracing Clara. You will have to come to Sunday dinner soon so we can celebrate properly. That would be lovely, Clara said, returning the embrace. As they rode back to the homestead, the sun beginning its descent, Clara was quiet. Hank wondered what she was thinking but did not want to pry. They had just made a monumental commitment to each other, and both needed time to process it. So, what do we do now? Clara finally asked as the cabin came into view. I suppose we figure out how to live together, Hank said. You said you wanted your own space. The loft, is that enough, or would you prefer the bedroom? The loft is fine, Clara said. I have made it comfortable over the years. But Hank, what about you? The barn cannot be a permanent solution. The main room has plenty of space for another bed, Hank said. I can build a simple frame, set it up in the corner. That way we each have privacy. Clara nodded, looking relieved. That could work. And for cooking, cleaning, the daily work? We figure it out as we go, Hank said. I am not helpless. I have been taking care of myself for 10 years. I can cook basic meals, clean up after myself, and the farm work, we divide it based on who is better at what. You are better at heavy labor, clearly, Clara said with a small smile. But I know the systems I have set up, the routines that work. Then you teach me, Hank said simply. I am not too proud to learn from you, Clara. You have been making this place work for 9 years. I would be a fool not to listen to your expertise. Something in Clara's expression softened at his words. Most men would not say that. Would not admit a woman might know more about something. Then most men are idiots, Hank said bluntly. Knowledge is knowledge, regardless of who has it. They settled into an awkward routine over the next few days. Hank built himself a sturdy bed frame in the corner of the main room, stretching canvas across it for a mattress and padding it with extra blankets. It was not luxurious, but it was comfortable enough. Clara maintained her space in the loft, coming down each morning to cook breakfast, and then heading out to her various tasks. Hank threw himself into the work of the farm, relearning skills he had abandoned a decade ago. Clara showed him the irrigation system she had built, explaining the timing and maintenance it required. She walked him through the fields, identifying the different crops and their needs. She taught him the quirks of each cow and the personality of every chicken. "That one is Bertha," Clara said, pointing to a particularly fat hen. "She is mean as a snake but lays the most eggs, and that brown one is Henrietta. She is sweet but likes to hide her eggs in odd places, so you have to watch where she goes." Hank found himself amused by the fact that Clara had named all the chickens. "You have been alone too long if you are having full conversations with chickens." "They are good listeners," Clara said defensively, but she was smiling. "Better than some people I could name." As the days passed, they began to settle into an easier rhythm together. Hank would wake at dawn and tend to the heavy chores, splitting wood, repairing fences, handling the larger livestock. Clara would manage the kitchen garden, the chickens, and the intricate work of maintaining her irrigation channels. In the evenings, they would eat together and discuss the next day's tasks. "We need to think about expanding the wheat field," Clara said one night over dinner. "With your help, we could clear another 2 acres before winter. That would mean significantly more income next harvest." "I agree," Hank said, "but we should also think about diversification. What about hay? We could sell it to other farms, and it would give us more feed for the livestock." Clara considered this. "That is a good idea. The land to the north would be perfect for hay. It is too rocky for wheat anyway." They were becoming partners in truth, not just on paper. But there was still an awkwardness between them, a careful distance they both maintained. They were polite, considerate, but there was a wall neither seemed willing to cross. It was Mrs. Jensen who finally called out the strangeness of the situation. She arrived one afternoon with a basket of preserves, ostensibly as a belated wedding gift. Clara invited her in for coffee, and Hank excused himself to work outside, sensing the women wanted to talk. "That man is built like a mountain," Mrs. Jensen said approvingly once Hank was out of earshot. "You did well for yourself, Clara." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It is not like that, Mrs. Jensen. It is a practical arrangement." "Oh, honey," Mrs. Jensen said with a knowing look. "I saw how he looks at you, and how you look at him when you think no one is watching. You can call it practical all you want, but there is something more brewing there." "We barely know each other," Clara protested. "So get to know each other," Mrs. Jensen said. "You are married now. You have time. But you both seem to be tiptoeing around like you are afraid to break something. Marriage is not that fragile, child. You have to take risks, be vulnerable with each other. Otherwise, what is the point?" Clara was quiet after Mrs. Jensen left, thinking about her words. That evening, instead of retreating to the loft immediately after dinner as she usually did, she stayed at the table while Hank cleaned the dishes. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Hank turned, his large hands dripping soapy water. "Of course." "Why did you really come back? After 10 years, what made you decide now was the time?" Hank dried his hands slowly, considering his answer. "I got tired of running. Tired of being alone with nothing but my own thoughts. In the mountains, there is too much silence. Too much time to think about everything you have lost. I realized I had been stuck in 1868. Living like that year had never ended. I needed to move forward, and I could not do that there. I had to come home, face what I left behind. And instead you found me," Clara said softly. "Instead I found you," Hank agreed. He came and sat back down at the table. "What about you? Why did you really come to Utah? You said you needed a fresh start, but there are lots of places you could have gone." Clara traced a pattern on the wood of the table with her finger. "I came here because I had heard the Mormon settlers believed in building Zion, creating a community based on cooperation and mutual support. I thought maybe in a place like that, a woman alone might have a chance. And I was right, mostly. People here have been kind to me, helped me when I needed it. But I have also been so lonely, Hank, working from sunrise to sunset every day with no one to share it with, no one to talk to except chickens." She tried to smile, but it was shaky. "When you showed up, part of me was terrified I would lose everything, but another part was almost relieved. The thought of not being alone anymore, even under strange circumstances, it was appealing." They looked at each other across the table, really looked. Maybe for the first time since they had met. Hank saw the vulnerability in Clara's eyes, the loneliness she had just confessed. She saw something similar in his, the ache of a man who had spent too long isolated. "We do not have to be lonely anymore," Hank said quietly. "We are partners now. Maybe we could try to be friends too." "I would like that," Clara said. "I would like that very much." From that night on, things began to change between them. They still maintained their separate sleeping arrangements, but the wall between them started to crumble. They began talking more, sharing stories from their pasts. Hank told Clara about his childhood, about his sweet sister Emma who had loved flowers, about his father's patient teaching and his mother's terrible singing voice. Clara told him about growing up in Denver, about her father's bookshop that had struggled to stay afloat, about the fiancé who had promised forever and delivered betrayal. "His name was William," Clara said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We were supposed to marry in the spring of 1869, but when my father died and left debts, William suddenly remembered he had always dreamed of going to California. Funny how those dreams only appeared after my circumstances changed. He was a fool," Hank said bluntly. "Any man who would walk away from you because of money is not worth having." Clara looked at him in surprise, then smiled. "That is sweet of you to say." "It is not sweet, it is the truth," Hank said. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Clara. Man or woman does not matter. What you have built here, what you have survived, it is remarkable." "You are not so bad yourself," Clara said, bumping her shoulder against his arm. "Big, scary mountain man who turns out to have a soft heart." "I am not soft," Hank protested, though he was fighting a smile. "You named one of the cows Daisy," Clara pointed out. "That is soft. She looks like a daisy," Hank said defensively, and Clara laughed, a bright, joyful sound that made something in Hank's chest warm. The weeks passed, turning into months. Summer gave way to fall, and they worked together to bring in the harvest. It was back-breaking work, but having two sets of hands made all the difference. The wheat yield was the best Clara had ever seen, and when they sold it in town, the profit was substantial. "We should celebrate," Hank said, holding the payment voucher. "This is a good achievement. You have worked hard for this, and we both should mark it." "What did you have in mind?" Clara asked. "There is a dance in town next Saturday," Hank said, feeling suddenly uncertain. "I heard Mrs. Jensen mention it. We could go, if you wanted, as a married couple should." Clara's eyes lit up. "I have not been to a dance in years. I stopped going after I came here because it was too hard watching the other couples." "Then we should go," Hank said decisively. "I am not much of a dancer, fair warning, but I will try not to step on your feet too much." The night of the dance, Clara came down from the loft wearing a dress Hank had not seen before. It was a deep green that matched her eyes, and she had done something different with her hair, pinning it up in a way that showed off her graceful neck. Hank found himself staring. "Is it all right?" Clara asked, suddenly self-conscious. "It is the only nice dress I own. I have been saving it for a special occasion." "You look beautiful," Hank said, and meant it. He had cleaned up as well, trimming his beard and wearing the one decent shirt he owned. "I am going to be the envy of every man there." Clara blushed, pleased. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The dance was held in the largest barn in Parowan, strung with lanterns and filled with people. A small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar in the corner, and couples swirled around the makeshift dance floor. Hank and Clara received a few curious looks when they arrived, but most people seemed genuinely happy to see them. "Clara Morrison." Mrs. Jensen swooped down on them immediately. "And Hank, you both look wonderful. Come, come, you must meet more people. Hank, you have not been properly introduced to the community yet." She dragged them around the barn, introducing Hank to what seemed like half of Parowan. Everyone had memories of his father to share, stories about Thomas Morrison's kindness or his skill with carpentry. Hank found it both painful and comforting to hear his father remembered so fondly. When the music started up for a waltz, Hank turned to Clara and held out his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Morrison?" "You may, Mr. Morrison," Clara said with a smile, placing her hand in his. Hank led her onto the dance floor, one large hand settling on her waist while the other held her hand gently. He had not been lying about his dancing skills. He was competent but far from graceful, his movements a bit stiff. But what he lacked in skill, he made up for in careful attention, making sure not to step on Clara's feet. "You are doing fine," Clara said softly, looking up at him. This close, Hank could see flecks of gold in her green eyes. "I am trying not to embarrass you," Hank said. "You could never embarrass me," Clara said. I am proud to be here with you, Hank, proud of what we have built together in these few months. Something shifted in that moment as they moved together to the music, surrounded by the warm glow of lanterns and the friendly faces of their community. Hank realized that this marriage of convenience had stopped being convenient weeks ago. Somewhere between the shared meals and the shared work, between the conversations on the porch and the quiet companionship, he had started to develop real feelings for Clara. Looking down at her now, seeing the softness in her expression as she looked back at him, Hank wondered if she felt it too. This pull between them, this growing desire to cross the boundaries they had established. Clara, he started, not sure what he wanted to say, but knowing he needed to say something. Yes, she prompted when he hesitated. I am glad you were on my land that day, Hank said finally. Glad for all of this, even though it started so strangely. You have made coming home bearable, more than bearable, you have made it good. Clara's eyes shimmered. I am glad too, glad you came back. Glad you were willing to see me as more than a trespasser. They continued to dance, but everything felt different now. The air between them was charged with possibility, with things unsaid but deeply felt. When the song ended, they stepped apart reluctantly. Other people claimed Clara for dances, neighbors wanting to chat and catch up. Hank found himself talking with Mr. Jensen about cattle prices and hay production, but his eyes kept drifting to where Clara laughed and spun with her dance partners. She looked so happy, so alive, and Hank realized he would do anything to keep that light in her eyes. It was late when they finally rode home together, the stars brilliant overhead. Clara was humming one of the tunes from the dance, swaying slightly in her saddle with remembered music. Did you have a good time, Hank asked. The best time I have had in years, Clara said. Thank you for suggesting it, Hank. Thank you for wanting to go with me. Of course, Hank said. We are married, after all. We should do things like that together. Are we, though? Clara asked suddenly, pulling her horse to a stop. Really married, I mean, or are we still just playing at it? Hank stopped his own horse, turning to look at her. In the moonlight, she was almost ethereal, her face pale and serious. What do you mean? I mean we live like polite strangers who happen to share a house, Clara said. We have separate beds, separate spaces. We are partners in work, but nothing more. Is that what you want, Hank? For this to stay a business arrangement forever? Hank's heart was pounding. This was the conversation he had been both craving and dreading. What do you want, Clara? I asked you first, she said, but there was a tremor in her voice. Hank dismounted and walked over to her horse, reaching up to help her down. When she slid from the saddle, he kept his hands on her waist, holding her close. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him. I want more, Hank said, his voice rough with emotion. I did not expect it, did not plan for it, but somewhere along the way, this stopped being just practical for me. You matter to me, Clara, not just as a partner, but as a person I care about deeply. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I think about you when we are apart, and when we danced tonight, all I could think about was how right it felt to hold you. Clara's breath caught. Really? Really, Hank confirmed, but I do not want to push you into something you are not ready for. We agreed to boundaries, and I will respect that if that is what you still want. If you want to keep this practical and nothing more, I will accept that. What if I do not want boundaries anymore? Clara whispered. What if I want this to be a real marriage? Hank's hands tightened on her waist. Then we make it real, however fast or slow you want to go. There is no rush, Clara. We have time to figure this out together. Clara reached up, her small hands framing his bearded face. I care about you too, Hank, more than I thought possible in such a short time. You are kind and strong and respectful. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. And yes, I want more too. Hank bent his head slowly, giving Clara every opportunity to pull away. But she did not. Instead, she stretched up on her toes to meet him halfway. This kiss was nothing like the chaste peck they had shared at their wedding. This was deep and genuine, full of all the feelings they had been holding back. Hank's arms came around Clara, pulling her close against his chest, and she melted into him with a soft sigh. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Hank rested his forehead against Clara's, unwilling to let her go just yet. So, what happens now? Clara asked breathlessly. Now we go home, Hank said, and we figure out the rest together. If you want me to court you properly, even though we are already married, I will. If you want to take things slowly, we will. Whatever you need, Clara, this is your choice as much as mine. Clara pulled back enough to look up at him, her eyes shining. I do not need a long courtship, Hank. I have already seen who you are over these past months. I know your character. I know you are a good man. And I know what I want. What do you want? Hank asked, though he thought he knew the answer. I want a real marriage, Clara said firmly. I want to share my life with you, truly share it. Not just the work and the meals, but everything. I want to fall asleep next to you and wake up beside you. I want to build a future together, not just maintain a partnership. Joy surged through Hank so intense it almost hurt. Are you sure? I am sure, Clara said. I am tired of being afraid, Hank. Tired of holding back because I am scared of being hurt again. You have shown me nothing but respect and kindness. I trust you, and I think I might be falling in love with you. You think? Hank said, unable to stop the smile spreading across his face. All right, I am falling in love with you, Clara corrected, laughing. Happy now? Getting there, Hank said. He pulled her close again, resting his chin on the top of her head. I am falling in love with you too, Clara Morrison, have been for weeks now if I am being honest. Kept trying to talk myself out of it, tell myself it was just proximity and convenience. But tonight, watching you dance and laugh, I could not deny it anymore. I love you. Clara hugged him tighter, her face pressed against his chest. Take me home, Hank. They rode the last mile to the homestead with a new airiness between them. When they arrived, Hank took care of the horses while Clara went inside to light lamps. When he entered the cabin, he found her standing nervously in the middle of the room. I do not know what to do now, she admitted. This is all new territory for me. For me too, Hank said, closing the door behind him. We just take it one step at a time. He moved closer to her, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. We do not have to rush anything, Clara. We have the rest of our lives to figure this out. I know, Clara said. But I also do not want to sleep alone anymore. Is that too forward of me to say? Not at all, Hank said softly. The bedroom, the one that was my parents', it has the bigger bed. If you want, we could share it. Make it ours. Clara nodded. I would like that. But maybe we should clean it first? It has been closed up for months. They spent the next hour together opening windows, dusting surfaces, and changing the bedding. It was mesmerizing and intimate in a way that felt right. This was them, Hank realized. Working together, building something together. That is what their marriage would be. When everything was ready, Clara changed into her nightgown in the privacy of the loft while Hank prepared for bed downstairs. When she came back down, looking vulnerable and beautiful in the simple white cotton, Hank felt his breath catch. You are sure about this? He asked one more time. I am sure, Clara said. She took his hand and led him to the bedroom. That night, they truly became husband and wife in every sense. Hank was gentle and patient, letting Clara set the pace. She was nervous but willing, and what they shared was tender and meaningful. Afterward, Clara lay curled against Hank's side, her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Are you all right? Hank asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. Better than all right, Clara murmured. This is exactly where I want to be. Hank pressed a kiss to the top of her head, feeling more content than he had in over a decade. He had come home expecting nothing but memories and ruin. Instead, he had found Clara, found love, found a future worth living. Life had a strange way of working out sometimes. The next morning they woke tangled together, and Hank was surprised by how natural it felt. Clara stirred against him, then opened her eyes and smiled. Good morning, husband, she said softly. Good morning, wife, Hank replied, and sealed it with a kiss. Their life together took on a new rhythm after that night. They still worked hard on the farm, but now there was an ease between them that had not existed before. They touched casually as they passed each other during the day, a hand on the back, a brief squeeze of the shoulder. They sat closer at meals, often with Clara's hand in Hank's. At night, they shared the bedroom, falling asleep in each other's arms. The homestead continued to thrive under their joint efforts. As fall turned to winter, they worked together to prepare for the cold months ahead. Hank chopped massive amounts of firewood, his powerful arms swinging the axe with rhythmic precision. Clara put up preserves and smoked meat, ensuring they would have plenty of food. We should think about next year, Clara said one evening as snow began to fall outside. They were curled together on the porch, wrapped in blankets and watching the world turn white. What we want to expand, what new projects to take on. I was thinking about the pigs you mentioned when I first arrived, Hank said. Now that we have 2 incomes from the harvest, we could afford a breeding pair. Start raising them come spring. That would be wonderful, Clara said excitedly, and I have been wanting to expand the vegetable garden, maybe build a small greenhouse so we can grow things year-round. A greenhouse is a good idea, Hank agreed. I could build that, and maybe we should think about adding on to the cabin. Another room or two, give us more space. Clara was quiet for a moment. Are you thinking about the future? About a family? Hank turned to look at her, seeing hope and nervousness in her eyes. I am. If that is something you want too, I do, Clara said softly. I want children with you, Hank. Want to fill this place with life and laughter. Then that is what we will do, Hank said, pulling her closer. We will build a life here, Clara, a real family. Something neither of us had but both of us deserve. Winter in Parowan could be harsh, but that year it felt almost cozy to Hank. He and Clara were snug in their cabin, with plenty of food and firewood. They spent the long evenings talking, playing cards, and planning for the future. Sometimes Hank would read aloud from Clara's small collection of books, his deep voice filling the cabin while she sewed or knitted. You are a good reader, Clara observed one night. Your voice is perfect for storytelling. My mother used to read to us every night, Hank said, closing the book. I guess I picked it up from her. Emma, my sister, she loved stories. Could not get enough of them. Tell me about her, Clara urged gently. Hank did not talk about his family often, the pain still too raw even after 10 years. But this time, with Clara's hand in his and the fire crackling warmly, Hank found himself opening up. She was 8 when she died. Should be 18 now, a grown woman. She had my mother's blonde hair and my father's stubborn streak. Wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. Was always trying to read anything she could get her hands on. She sounds wonderful, Clara said. She was, Hank agreed. They all were. I should have been here, should have done more to save them. Hank, no, Clara said firmly, sitting up to look at him directly. You cannot blame yourself for a fever. That is not how illness works. You could have been here and died yourself, or been here and been just as helpless. Do not carry that guilt. I left them in the ground and ran away, Hank said, the old shame rising up. You were a young man, barely more than a boy who had just lost everyone he loved, Clara said. You did what you needed to do to survive. There is no shame in that. And you came back eventually, Hank. You came home. That is what matters. Hank pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I do not know what I did to deserve you, Clara Morrison. You were kind when you could have been cruel, Clara said simply. You saw me as a person, not an inconvenience. You gave me a partnership when you could have demanded I leave. You are a good man, Hank. That is what you did to deserve me. As winter deepened, their bond only grew stronger. They learned each other's habits and preferences. Hank discovered that Clara hummed when she was content and got a little furrow between her eyebrows when she was concentrating. Clara learned that Hank was an early riser who liked his coffee strong, and that he had a surprisingly gentle touch when working with injured animals. You have a gift with the creatures, Clara observed one day, as Hank carefully bandaged the leg of a chicken that had gotten into a scuffle with a predator. Animals are honest, Hank said, focused on his work. They do not lie or deceive. They are scared or hurt or happy, and they show it plainly. I respect that. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly together. Clara made a special meal and baked a pie from their preserved apples. Hank surprised her by carving a beautiful set of wooden spoons, the handles decorated with delicate flowers. Hank, these are beautiful, Clara exclaimed, running her fingers over the detailed carving. I did not know you could do this kind of work. My father taught me, Hank said. I have not done it in years, but I wanted to make you something special. You deserve more than I can give you, but this is a start. You give me everything that matters, Clara said, tears in her eyes. You give me love and partnership and a home. These spoons are perfect, but you are the real gift. That night they made love by the fire, tender and passionate, sealing their first Christmas together with intimacy and joy. As winter gave way to spring of 1879, they began preparing for the new growing season. True to their plans, they built a small greenhouse and expanded the vegetable garden. Hank constructed it carefully, using materials they purchased in town along with lumber he cut himself. Clara was amazed at his skill with carpentry, watching as he precisely measured and fit each piece. Your father taught you well, she said, admiring the sturdy frame of the greenhouse. He did, Hank agreed. I wish I could show him what we have built here, Clara. I think he would be proud. I think he would be too, Clara said softly. They also purchased their breeding pair of pigs, much to Clara's delight. She named them Harold and Maude, despite Hank's protests. You cannot name animals we are going to eat eventually, he said. I am not naming their babies, Clara protested. Just the breeding pair. They deserve names if they are going to be part of our farm long term. Hank just shook his head, but he was smiling. Clara's tendency to name everything was endearing, even if impractical. As the weather warmed, they fell into the rhythm of spring planting. It was exhausting work, but they did it together, often pausing to steal kisses or share a laugh. Watching Clara work, her face flushed with exertion, and her eyes bright with purpose, Hank fell more in love with her every day. It was in late April that Clara first mentioned she might be pregnant. They were eating breakfast, and Hank noticed she had barely touched her food. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked with concern. "I am fine," Clara said, then paused. "Actually, I might be better than fine, Hank. I think I am with child." Hank froze his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You think?" "I am fairly certain," Clara said, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "My monthly courses have not come, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings. All the signs point to it." Hank set down his cup very carefully, afraid his shaking hands would drop it. "We are going to have a baby?" "I think so," Clara said, watching his face anxiously. "Are you happy about it?" Happy did not begin to cover what Hank felt. He stood so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor, and in 2 strides he was around the table, pulling Clara up into his arms. "Happy," he repeated, his voice choked with emotion. "Clara, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. We are going to be parents." Clara laughed, relieved, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I was hoping you would feel that way. I know we have only been truly married for a few months, but it feels right." "It is right," Hank said firmly. He set her down gently, then immediately knelt so he was level with her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I am your father, and I promise to do everything in my power to give you a good life." Clara's eyes filled with tears at the tender gesture. She ran her fingers through Hank's long hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had come back from the mountains and given her everything she had ever wanted. "We should probably have the doctor confirm it," Clara said practically, though she was smiling through her tears. "We will go to town tomorrow." Hank agreed, standing and pulling her close again. "But regardless of what the doctor says, I already know the truth. I can see it in your eyes, Clara. We are going to have a baby." The doctor confirmed Clara's suspicion the next day. She was indeed pregnant, likely due in late November or early December. Dr. Wilson gave her instructions on care and diet and assured them both that Clara seemed healthy and strong. "You have been doing hard physical labor," the doctor said to Clara. "You will need to start taking it easier as the pregnancy progresses." "I will make sure she does," Hank said firmly, and Clara squeezed his hand, amused by his immediate protectiveness. Word of Clara's pregnancy spread quickly through Parowan. Mrs. Jensen was delighted, arriving at the homestead with baby clothes she had been saving and advice on everything from morning sickness to labor. "You are going to be wonderful parents," she declared, hugging them both. "That baby is blessed to have you." As spring turned to summer, Hank watched Clara's body change with fascinated wonder. Her stomach began to swell with their growing child, and he found himself constantly wanting to touch it, to feel connected to the life they had created. "You are hovering," Clara said with amusement one day, catching him watching her as she worked in the garden. "Can you blame me?" Hank said, not bothering to deny it. "You are carrying our child. I want to make sure you are safe, that you are not overdoing it." "I am fine," Clara assured him. "Pregnant women have been working for thousands of years. I am not fragile." "I know you are not fragile," Hank said. "You are one of the strongest people I know. But that does not mean you should not let me help when I can." Clara softened at his words. "You are sweet. All right, you can help. But I draw the line at you treating me like glass. I need to stay active and useful, Hank. It is good for me and the baby." They found a balance, with Hank taking on more of the heavy work, while Clara focused on tasks that did not require as much physical strain. The farm continued to thrive, the crops growing lush and healthy. Their small herd of pigs multiplied, Maud giving birth to a litter of piglets in June. "We are going to need more pens," Clara said, watching the piglets root around with their mother. "I will build them," Hank said, "after we finish the addition to the cabin." True to his word, Hank had started construction on a new room for the cabin, working in the evenings and on Sundays after church. It would be a nursery for the baby, with space for a crib and storage for baby things. He worked carefully, wanting everything to be perfect for his child. Clara would often sit and watch him work, marveling at the skill in his hands. "You should consider hiring out your carpentry skills," she said one evening. "People would pay good money for work this fine." "Maybe after the baby comes," Hank said, hammering in a nail with precise strikes. "Right now, I just want to focus on making sure our family has everything we need." Their second harvest that fall was even better than the first. With Hank's additional labor and their expanded fields, they brought in more wheat and hay than Clara had ever managed alone. The profit was substantial, and they discussed investing in more livestock and possibly even hiring help for the next planting season. We could offer fair wages, Clara said. Help some of the younger men in town who are struggling to get started. Pass on the kindness that was shown to me when I first arrived. I like that idea, Hank said. Build up the community while building up our farm. As Clara's pregnancy advanced into the later months, Hank became even more protective. He insisted she rest more, often carrying her to the porch swing so she could watch him work rather than standing for long periods. Clara found his attention both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from love. I have never had anyone to protect before, Hank admitted one night as they lay in bed, his large hands spread across her swollen belly. My family. I failed them. I was not here when they needed me. I will not fail you and our baby, Clara. I cannot. You did not fail your family, Hank, Clara said firmly, as she had many times before, and you will not fail us. You are going to be a wonderful father. I see it in everything you do and how you care for the animals, how you take care of me. Our child is so lucky to have you. As if in agreement, the baby kicked strongly under Hank's hand. He grinned, that expression of pure joy that Clara loved so much. Did you feel that? He asked unnecessarily. I definitely felt it, Clara laughed. This little one is active tonight. They spent hours like that with Hank's hand on Clara's stomach, feeling their baby move and dreaming about the future. They discussed names, though they could not decide on anything definite. They talked about what they would teach their child, what values they wanted to pass on. Hard work, Clara said. Honesty. Kindness to others. Respect for the land, Hank added. And the importance of family. No matter what happens, family comes first. Always, Clara agreed. November arrived with the first serious cold. Clara was large now, moving with the distinctive waddle of a woman in her final weeks of pregnancy. Dr. Wilson had examined her and declared everything was progressing normally, but that they should be prepared for labor to begin any time. Hank made sure they were ready. He stockpiled extra firewood near the house so he would not have to leave Clara alone to fetch it. He arranged for Mrs. Jensen to be on call to help with the birth, as she had experience as a midwife. He even rode to town and back in record time to ensure all necessary supplies were on hand. You are nesting worse than I am, Clara teased, watching him check the nursery for the third time that day. I want everything to be perfect, Hank said. When our baby arrives, I want them to have everything they need. They will have us, Clara said, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist as much as her belly would allow. That is what they will need most. Everything else is just details. Labor began on a cold night in early December. Clara woke Hank with a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady despite the pain he could see in her eyes. It is time, she said simply. Hank was up immediately, his heart pounding. He helped Clara through the first contractions while he built up the fire and sent for Mrs. Jensen. The older woman arrived quickly, bless her, and took charge of the situation with calm efficiency. You are doing fine, Clara, dear, Mrs. Jensen said, checking Clara's progress. Strong contractions, good spacing. This baby knows how to make an entrance. Hank stayed by Clara's side through all of it, holding her hand and offering encouragement even when she squeezed hard enough to make his bones ache. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths and supported her when she needed to walk. He had faced wild animals, harsh winters, and years of solitude, but nothing had terrified him quite like watching Clara in pain and being unable to stop it. You are doing so well, he murmured, kissing her temple. So strong. I am right here, Clara. I am not going anywhere. Do not leave, Clara gasped between contractions. Promise you will not leave. Never, Hank said fiercely. I will never leave you. You and this baby are my whole world. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the early morning hours. But finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, a new sound filled the cabin. The thin, insistent wail of a newborn baby. It is a boy, Mrs. Jensen announced triumphantly, quickly wrapping the squirming infant in clean cloths. A healthy, strong boy. She placed the baby on Clara's chest, and Hank watched through tears as his wife's face transformed with wonder and love. The baby, red-faced and angry at the world, had a shock of dark hair and waving fists. Hello, little one, Clara whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. We have been waiting for you. Hank reached out with one large finger to touch his son's tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers closed around it with surprising strength. Something in Hank's chest broke wide open at that moment, a rush of love so powerful it brought him to his knees beside the bed. He is perfect, Hank managed to say through his tears. Clara, you are amazing. Thank you for this gift. Thank you. Clara was crying too, exhausted but radiantly happy. We made him together, our son. After Mrs. Jensen had cleaned up and made sure both mother and baby were healthy, she left them alone to bond as a family. Hank carefully climbed into bed next to Clara, both of them gazing in wonder at the small life they had created. "What should we name him?" Clara asked softly, watching the baby's face as he slept against her chest. Hank was quiet for a moment, thinking, "What about Henry, after my father's middle name? Henry Thomas Morrison." "Henry," Clara tested the name, then smiled. "I love it. Henry Thomas Morrison, welcome to your family." Little Henry proved to be a good baby, fussy only when hungry or needing to be changed. He had Clara's green eyes and what looked like it would be Hank's strong build. Hank was besotted from the first moment, constantly wanting to hold his son or just watch him sleep. "You are hovering again," Clara said with amusement, watching Hank stare at baby Henry in his cradle. "He is so small," Hank said in wonder. "How can something so small be so perfect?" "He is pretty perfect, is not he?" Clara agreed. She was recovering well from the birth, though Hank still insisted she take it easy. Those first weeks with Henry were exhausting but joyful. They took turns with night feedings, though Hank often woke even when it was not his turn, just to watch Clara nurse their son. There was something profoundly beautiful about seeing his wife and child together like that, a completeness that made his heart ache in the best way. Christmas that year was special in a way neither of them had experienced before. They kept the celebration small and simple, just the three of them, but it felt perfect. Henry was too young to understand, but they gave him his first toy anyway, a carved wooden horse that Hank had made during Clara's pregnancy. "He will treasure this when he is older," Clara said, tucking the horse safely away. "He will know his father made it with love." As winter settled in, they found their rhythm as a family. Clara managed the household and cared for Henry while Hank handled the outside work and the livestock. But they always made time for each other, stealing quiet moments when Henry napped or sitting together in the evenings with the baby between them. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Clara said one night, her head on Hank's shoulder while Henry slept in his cradle nearby. 2 years ago I was alone on this land, working myself to exhaustion and wondering if I had made a terrible mistake coming to Utah. Now I have you and Henry, and I cannot imagine my life any other way." "I spent 10 years running from happiness," Hank said, his arm around her shoulders, "convinced I did not deserve it after failing my family. But you and Henry, you gave me permission to live again, to hope again. I love you both more than words can say. Show me instead," Clara said, tilting her face up to kiss him. They loved each other quietly that night, careful not to wake the baby, but the passion between them burned as bright as ever. Their love had been forged in unexpected circumstances, but it had proven itself true and lasting. The months passed, and Henry grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby. He started smiling, then laughing, his giggles filling the cabin with joy. Hank would spend hours playing with his son, making silly faces and sounds just to hear Henry laugh. "You are wrapped around his tiny finger," Clara observed with amusement. "Completely," Hank agreed without shame. "He is my boy. I will give him the world if I can." Spring of 1880 arrived, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities. With a baby in the house, they had to adjust their work routines. Mrs. Jensen often came to help watch Henry while Clara worked, and several of the church ladies brought meals and supplies as their way of supporting the young family. "This is what community means," Clara told Hank. "People helping people, everyone contributing what they can. I am grateful we have this." "So am I," Hank agreed. He had been welcomed fully into Parowan society now, no longer the mysterious stranger but a respected member of the community. Men sought his advice on carpentry and livestock. Women praised Clara's vegetables and asked for her preserving recipes. They had become an integral part of the town's life. That spring, they hired their first helper, a young man named Jacob, who was the youngest son of a large Mormon family. He was hard-working and eager to learn, and Hank enjoyed teaching him the finer points of farming. "You are a good teacher," Clara observed, watching Hank patiently explain irrigation techniques to Jacob. "I had a good teacher in my father," Hank said. "I am just passing on what he taught me." With Jacob's help, they were able to expand their operations even further. They added more chickens, another milk cow, and planted additional acres of wheat and hay. The farm was becoming truly prosperous, providing not just for their family but creating opportunities for others in the community. As summer arrived, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. Henry was not quite a year old yet, but she was thrilled at the prospect of giving him a sibling. Irish twins, Mrs. Jensen said with a laugh when she heard the news. Your hands are going to be full, Clara. I know, Clara said, but she was glowing with happiness. But I am so excited. I always wanted a big family, and now it is happening. Hank was equally delighted, if a bit nervous about having 2 babies to care for. But watching Henry grow had given him confidence in his abilities as a father. He knew they would manage together. Boy or girl, what are you hoping for? Clara asked him one evening. Healthy, Hank said immediately. That is all that matters. Though it might be nice for Henry to have a brother close in age. Built-in playmate, or a sister might be lovely too, Clara said. Teach him how to be gentle and protective of girls. Either way, they will have each other, Hank said, placing his hand on Clara's still flat stomach, and they will know they are loved. That harvest was their best yet. They brought in more crops than ever before, and the profit allowed them to make significant improvements to the homestead. Hank built a proper barn to replace the old one, larger and more efficient. They invested in better equipment and tools. They paid off the last of the debts Clara had incurred in her early years farming alone. We are truly secure now, Clara said, looking at their account books. Not just getting by, but actually prosperous. I never imagined this when I first came here. You built the foundation, Hank reminded her. I just helped expand on what you started. We built it together, Clara corrected. Everything we have, we created as partners. That is what makes it special. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma after Hank's sister, was born in late February of 1881. This labor was faster than Clara's first, and baby Emma arrived screaming her displeasure at the cold world she had entered. She had her mother's dark hair and what promised to be her father's size, already larger than Henry had been at birth. Another healthy, beautiful baby, Dr. Wilson pronounced. You two make fine children. Henry, now just over a year old, was fascinated by his new sister. He would toddle over to her cradle and stare, occasionally reaching out to touch her tiny hand with his chubby fingers. Gentle, Hank would remind him. We have to be very gentle with baby Emma. Watching his son interact with his daughter, Hank felt a contentment he had never imagined possible. His family, the one he had lost, could never be replaced. But he had built something new and precious here with Clara. Henry and Emma would grow up knowing they were loved, surrounded by community and security. They would have the childhood he wanted for them, full of joy and possibility. What are you thinking about? Clara asked, nursing Emma while keeping an eye on Henry playing with his wooden toys. Just how grateful I am, Hank said. For all of this, for you, for our children, for this life we have built. I came back to Utah expecting nothing but ghosts and pain. Instead, I found everything I never knew I needed. We found each other, Clara said softly, and made something beautiful together. The years that followed were full and busy. Henry and Emma grew quickly, as children do, and were eventually joined by 2 more siblings, another boy named Thomas in 1883, and finally a girl they called Rose in 1885. The cabin was expanded twice more to accommodate their growing family, until it bore little resemblance to the simple structure Hank's father had built decades earlier. The farm continued to prosper. They were now one of the most successful operations in the area, employing several workers and selling their products throughout southern Utah. Hank's carpentry skills became renowned, and he took on side projects building furniture and doing construction work for neighbors. Clara became known for her preserves and her skill at training other women in farming techniques. But despite their success and busy lives, Hank and Clara always made time for each other. They still stole kisses in the barn when they thought the children were not watching. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains. Their love, born from unexpected circumstances and practical necessity, had deepened into something profound and lasting. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked one evening when they were alone, the children finally all asleep. The way it started, the strange circumstances of our marriage? Never, Hank said firmly. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Morrison. You and our children gave me a reason to live again. If anything, I am grateful for whatever strange twist of fate put you on my land that day. Your words stunned me, Clara said thoughtfully. That first day, when you said you wanted to find a way for us both to keep what mattered. Most men would have just thrown me out without a second thought. But you saw me, really saw me, and respected what I had built. That is when I first started to hope that maybe this could work. I saw a woman who had poured her heart into the land I loved, Hank said. How could I not respect that? You had done what I had been too grief-stricken to do, kept my family's legacy alive and thriving. Throwing you out would have been cruel and wasteful. Still, Clara said, it was kind. And kindness matters, especially in this harsh world. Henry, their eldest, grew into a strong boy who idolized his father and followed him around the farm whenever possible. Emma was more like her mother, practical and clever, with a gift for growing things. Thomas was the dreamer, always asking questions and wanting to know how everything worked. And little Rose was the baby, sweet and charming, able to wrap both her parents around her tiny finger with a single smile. Watching his children play together, seeing them happy and healthy and full of life, Hank often thought about his own sister Emma. She would have been about 30 now if she had lived, probably married with children of her own. He liked to think she would have approved of his naming his daughter after her, would have loved being an aunt to these 4 beautiful children. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, coming up beside him where he stood watching the children. "My sister," Hank admitted, "wishing she could have known our children, wishing my parents could have seen all of this." Clara slipped her hand into his. "They know," she said softly. "Somehow, somewhere they know. And they are proud of you, Hank, proud of what you have built, the man you have become, the father you are to your children." "I hope so," Hank said. He turned to pull Clara close, resting his chin on top of her head as they watched their children together. "I spent so many years feeling like I had failed them by leaving, but maybe coming back, building this life, raising a family on the land they loved, maybe that is how I honor them best." "It is," Clara assured him. "Every day you live well, every moment of joy with our family, that honors their memory. You did not forget them, Hank. You just learned to live again. There is no shame in that." As their children grew older, Hank and Clara made sure to teach them about their heritage. They took them to the small family cemetery behind the barn where Hank's parents and sister were buried. They told stories about Thomas Morrison the carpenter, about Emma who loved flowers, about the courage it took to come west and build a life in the wilderness. "Your grandfather would have loved you all so much," Hank told his children, "and your grandmother would have spoiled you terribly." "Tell us again about Mama's farm," Henry begged. He loved hearing about how his mother had worked the land alone for years, so Clara would tell them, explaining how she had arrived in Utah with almost nothing, how the kind people of Parowan had given her a chance, how she had worked until her hands bled to make the farm productive. "And then Papa came back," Emma would always say at the crucial moment in the story. "And then Papa came back," Clara would confirm with a smile. "And he found me here. And he did not send me away even though he could have. Instead, we decided to work together, and that changed both of our lives forever." The children loved the story, never seeming to tire of hearing how their parents had come together. To them, it was a romantic tale of fate and second chances. To Hank and Clara, it was simply their lives, but they never took for granted how fortunate they had been. By 1890, Hank was 44 years old, and Clara was 38. Their oldest, Henry, was now 10 and already showing promise as a farmer. Emma was 9 and could outwork children twice her age in the garden. Thomas was 7 and had recently declared his intention to be an inventor when he grew up. Little Rose was 5 and the darling of the whole family. They had been married for 12 years, together for even longer, and their love had only deepened with time. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room. They had built not just a farm but a legacy, not just a family but a dynasty that would continue long after they were gone. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the children play in the yard, Hank turned to Clara with a serious expression. "What is it?" she asked, immediately alert to his mood. "I was just thinking," Hank said slowly, "about that first day, when I rode down from the ridge and saw you working in the field. I was so angry at first, seeing someone on my land without permission, but then you turned around and looked at me, and something in my chest shifted. I did not know it then, but that was the moment my life started again." "Mine too," Clara said softly. "I was terrified you would make me leave. This place was my whole world and I thought I was about to lose it. But instead you offered me a partnership. You saw me as an equal, not an obstacle. That is when I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have more than just survival. Maybe I could have happiness too. We have had a good life together, have not we?" Hank said, though it was more statement than question. "The best life," Clara confirmed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Their children's laughter rang out across the yard, a sound that never failed to make both of them smile. "You know what I love most about our story?" Clara said eventually. "What is that?" "That it is not finished," Clara said, turning to look at him with those green eyes he had fallen in love with. "We still have so much life ahead of us. Years to watch our children grow, to build even more together, to love each other. This is not an ending, Hank. It is an ongoing story, and I cannot wait to see what the next chapters bring." "Neither can I," Hank said, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her forehead. "As long as I have you by my side, I am ready for whatever comes." The seasons continued their endless cycle, as they always had and always would. Winter snows gave way to spring rains, which nurtured summer growth that yielded fall harvests. And through it all, the Morrison family thrived on their homestead outside Parowan, Utah. Hank taught his sons carpentry and farming, passing on the skills his own father had taught him. Clara taught her daughters to be strong and independent, to know their own worth, and never settle for less than they deserved. Together, they showed all their children what a real partnership looked like, what genuine love and respect between husband and wife could build. The town of Parowan continued to grow around them, civilization slowly taming what had once been wild frontier. But the Morrison homestead remained a constant, a testament to hard work, second chances, and the transformative power of love. On Sunday mornings, the family would pile into their wagon and ride to church together, a prosperous and respected family in the community. The children would attend Sunday school, while Hank and Clara sat together in the sanctuary, their hands linked between them as they had been for over a decade. "You are the best decision I ever made," Hank would sometimes whisper to Clara during the service. "We are the best decision we ever made," Clara would correct with a smile. "Together." And she was right. Individually, they had been lost and lonely, carrying wounds and regrets. But together they had built something beautiful and lasting. A family, a home, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Years later, when they were old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren, people would still ask them about how they met. The story never got old. The mountain man who came home after 10 years to find a woman farming his land, and how her words had stunned him into seeing a possibility he had never imagined. "What did she say that stunned you so much?" people would ask Hank, and he would smile, taking Clara's wrinkled hand in his own and squeezing gently. "She said this land was her whole life, that she had poured everything into it. And I realized in that moment that she had done for my family's legacy what I had been too broken to do myself. She had kept it alive and thriving. How could I punish someone for that? How could I not respect such dedication? So instead of sending her away, I asked her to stay. Best decision I ever made. He offered me a partnership," Clara would add. "Saw me as an equal when most men would have just seen an obstacle. That is when I knew he was different, that he might be someone worth taking a chance on." "And were we right to take that chance?" Hank would ask, though he knew the answer. "More right than we could have imagined," Clara would say. "We built a beautiful life together, my love. Beautiful and full, and exactly what we both needed." Their children would grow and have children of their own, spreading out across Utah territory and beyond, but always remembering the lessons learned on the Morrison homestead. Hard work, integrity, respect for the land and for each other. These values, passed down from parents to children, would be Hank and Clara's true legacy, but that was still far in the future. For now, in this moment, they were simply a family living their lives together. The mountain man who had come home, the woman who had made his land bloom, and the children born of their unlikely union. They had faced challenges and overcome them. They had known grief and found joy. They had taken a chance on each other when every practical consideration suggested they should not, and they had been rewarded beyond measure. Every evening, as the sun set over the Utah mountains, Hank and Clara would find a moment alone together. Sometimes on the porch, sometimes in the barn, sometimes just standing in the field where Hank had first seen Clara all those years ago, and they would hold each other, grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "I love you," Hank would say, as he did every day. "I love you too," Clara would reply, as she always had and always would. And that love, born from unexpected circumstances and nurtured through years of partnership and respect, would endure. Through every season, every challenge, every joy and sorrow, they had built something rare and precious, and they would cherish it for the rest of their lives. The mountain man had come home and found a woman farming his land. Her words had stunned him, yes, but her actions had transformed him, and together they had created a story worth telling, a life worth living, and a love that would last forever. The end.